Welcome everybody. My name is Sloter. I'm the head of Office of the European Parliament. So you are now a guest of the European Parliament and of the European Commission, because this debate center is run by two institutions. Very welcome to Mr. Ambassador, and of course Mrs. Vlahutin, Mr. Wiersma, and of course Mr. Goslinga, who will moderate this debate. The topic of the debate is Croatia and the state of the European democracy. Croatia is one of the last member state joining the European Union, and I think and I hope that this debate will not only go about what all the member state thinks about European democracy, but that we also can learn something about the Croatian experience, etc. So I would like to give the floor to Mr. Goslinga.
Thank you, Edward. Welcome to everybody, especially our guests from Croatia. This is the second debate in a series of debates on the state of democracy in Europe. And as you all know, the legitimacy and effectiveness of the European cooperation is much in doubt in our country. So we thought, how would our neighbors look at it? 2 weeks ago we had the British, today Croatia, the 28th and youngest member of the European Union, so very welcome, Mrs. Ambassador, and Romana Vlahutin. I hope I pronounce it well, but if you try to pronounce my name, you will be... Even Edward didn't manage the last time. So, well, today I read something in the book of Henry Thoreau. Was a 19th century writer in America. America was at that time building a federation, the United States of America. And Thoreau wrote, "We are in a great hurry to construct a telegraph from Maine to Texas. But the question is, do Maine and Texas have anything important to communicate?" Nowadays the world has become smaller, and so Croatia is not so far away from us. It's a small country. I read today on Wikipedia, I must admit, a slogan, "A small country for a big holiday." So that's very nice, and that's we have in common, I presume. So our kickoff today is by Jan Marinus Wiersma. It's an old hand in Dutch politics, international affairs. He was international secretary for the Labour Party in Holland, member of the European Parliament for 15 years in the 90s. And he will kick off with his view on the entrance of Croatia, the discussion about the competence, the division of powers within the Union, between the nation states and Brussels. That's a very big topic, I think, in the next elections. So we're curious, and after that, Marinus, I will give the word to Romana Vlahutin. So thank you, and welcome to the debate.
Well, thank you very much for your introduction. But I tend to get it right through. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm always pleased to discuss, especially a country I love very much, which is Croatia. I've been there many times. Old links with the country in my time as member of the European Parliament, but also before that as a representative of European social democracy, working also with friends in your country, and one of them is now even Prime Minister of that country. I have some difficulty, I already explained it with the topic, is Croatia and the European democracy debate, because I can imagine that in Croatia there are other things that are high on the agenda and in the front of people's minds. Of course, in the Dutch context, it's very relevant to discuss where we are in Europe and how to balance the roles of national parliaments and the European Parliament. And we're just a few months away from the European elections here, and there is already a heated debate about the pros and cons of European integration, or cooperation as we call it now. be aware of how important words are. We talk in Holland these days about cooperation, not about integration anymore, and we gave away ever closer union in the last official statement of our foreign minister. Anyhow, there is this debate, even there is talk about leaving the Eurozone or having a referendum on membership as such. But I'm not sure whether this kind of discussion on the balance of national and European scrutiny of EU policies and on the transfer of powers or competences that we have here in academic and political circles is as intense in the new member states, also a member state like Croatia, if it takes place at all. But I'm glad Mrs. Vlahutin is here to tell us more about the debate in her country. But I nevertheless would really appreciate an active input of new member states in the discussion about fine-tuning the roles of the national parliaments and the European Parliament. But I can imagine, like I said, that other concerns related to EU membership take priority, and I will mention a few points in relation to that later on. But I do hope, like I said, that these countries, these new member states, will engage in what I consider to be the real debate in the run-up to the European elections and afterwards. And the present Dutch government is campaigning for a greater role of the national parliaments in deciding what Brussels should do and not do. And it's part of the current debate about the application of the principle of subsidiarity, which means basically what can be done nationally should remain at that level. And this debate was actually started in the beginning of last year by Prime Minister Cameron of the UK, but it has also been put on the agenda, but in a very different way, by other EU governments. While David Cameron is especially concerned about the position of the United Kingdom in the European Union and the rising Euroscepticism in his own party on the continent, where, I have to admit, anti-EU sentiments have also increased on the continent, a better functioning and more focused European Union and a more effective democratic scrutiny have been cited as motives for putting subsidiarity again on the agenda. And in the Dutch view, the new European Commission should, after consultation of the other EU institutions, like the European Parliament, present as part of its work programme a list of priorities with do's and don'ts respecting the subsidiarity principle. And national parliaments should have a say in this process, since the treaties give them the responsibility for guarding the principle of subsidiarity. And the Dutch and other governments not only want to trim the EU in this way, but also hope to compensate, and I think this is the basic point, want to compensate for the growing influence of the European Parliament on the European Commission. And the European Parliament has stepped up its ambitions even by claiming a decisive voice in the nomination and the election of the new Commission President, and determine his or her legislative work programme. And the Parliament also hopes to strengthen the community method after the European Council having overlooked the European Parliament and the European Commission when taking major decisions on the euro crisis in the past years. That allowed Germany and France to dictate outcomes and presented some governments with the alibi of not having transferred powers to Brussels. And the Dutch Prime Minister Rutte has been keen to underline this. The European Parliament, however, hints in the other direction, at the establishment of real European government and political union. No wonder that some member states get worried about a reduced influence of the Council of Ministers on the Commission. And in trying to tackle the ambitions of the European Parliament, they want a greater role of national parliaments and propose, for example, to give them more blocking power, the so-called red card, when subsidiarity but also proportionality of EU policies are at stake. And these member states argue that the European Parliament lacks the legitimacy to claim a stronger role because it does not have the sovereign competences that national parliaments have and is plagued by very low turnouts. That may be true, but in many countries the European Parliament as such is more popular than the national parliaments, and the Netherlands being one of the few exceptions on that score. Higher turnouts in national parliament elections are therefore not so much an expression of higher trust in national politicians. I think they are caused by the fact that those who turn out up at the ballot boxes in national elections believe that their vote counts, and it seems much less the case with European elections, which people find difficult and complex to understand. So it's hard to say actually who would win a proper beauty contest, the European Parliament or the national parliaments. I personally believe that we might well have a new power sharing arrangement in the European Union after the May elections. I suppose myself that the European Parliament and the Council will establish relations with the new European Commission in such a way that equidistance, as we call it, is guaranteed, that both the Council and the Parliament have the same political distance to an independent Commission. And I hope that a stronger role of the European Parliament, which I am in favour of, is complemented with more active engagement of the national parliaments, and that in time they together will be able to reduce this famous democratic deficit. I'm quite sure that the European Parliament will be very committed to this, no doubt about that. I wish that all national parliaments will do the same, not only in some member states, but in all 28. And if they work together, European Parliament and national parliaments, they can both be winners. Otherwise it might all end up as a zero-sum game. Let me now turn and make some remarks about the new member states. Also there one will find pessimism about the future of the European Union and a lack of confidence in EU's institutions. But the situation is also somewhat different, and I would like to mention 3 areas I think we should discuss and be part of the discussion also maybe today. And the new member states are young democracies that have gained independence only after 1989 and that have gone through difficult transition processes. If citizens there look with suspicion at the European Union, I think it's not so much because their immediate concern is the democratic balance in Europe, but the fear of loss of national identity, a national identity they just regained after having been part of the communist dictatorship for so many years. And they, of course, wonder, will the EU respect their new independence? Will the EU respect also the fact that they have to develop and have to sometimes emphasize also their national identity and their newly won independence? The question is understandable, of course, because Moscow never respected that. But again, even though this is a trend, and you see this back in discussions in new member states, the conclusion should not be that these member states actually favor the intergovernmental method, in a sense, because that's the best way to protect national interest, because it is intergovernmental method, every member state in principle has a veto. If I follow the debate since I joined in 2004, 2007, I have to say that the new member states have been more on the community method side than on the intergovernmental side, and that the older member states like France, the Netherlands, and Germany, and Finland, and Britain have much more emphasized the intergovernmental method. And I think one of the reasons is that also the new member states, and most of them, with the exception of Poland, and maybe you could call, I mentioned Romania, but most of them are small countries, and they know, like us, that the community method is more in favor of the smaller member states, and the intergovernmental usually is to the profit of the larger ones. So we should not, so that's one point I would like to make. Secondly, I also expect the older member states to show some respect for the sensitivities in these new member states, these young democracies, when it comes to their national identity and everything that, and if they emphasize that and people discuss that in these countries, it does not mean that they're all extreme right nationalists. No, they are proud of their country and proud of their local democracies, and I think as older member states, we should respect and also allow these countries to deal with the past, the present and the future, and to define also their national identity as being part of the European Union. I think the second important point, which is maybe not so much emphasized in the debate here, is in the new member states, the countries in question and their populations have been considering in the not too distant past whether to join the European Union or not, and whether or not to accept membership conditions. And also, after having joined the European Union, this more general issue of the price of membership, I think, determines people's view of the European Union. And I have to say also here in the Netherlands and other countries like the UK, this is coming more to the forefront. That I think in the run-up to the European elections there will be much more a debate about yes or no to the EU as such than a debate about national parliaments versus the European Parliament. Because, like I said, we had this debate here. There's at least one party in Holland that wants a referendum on membership. So we should be aware that not only in the new member states this is still an issue, the price these countries have paid, but it was a discussion about getting in. And here we will have a discussion about getting out, but both are of course about the price of EU membership. Like I said, so this democratic balance, how important it is maybe here, has not been, in my view, the main question in the new member states. And people were and are more concerned about the direct consequences of EU membership. And in Croatia, as far as I remember, but please correct me, Mrs. Vlahutin, if I'm wrong, the debate in the run-up to the EU accession concentrated on the issue of war crimes, the cooperation is a tribunal here in The Hague, the opening up of markets to competition would not cost many jobs, the future of state aid and the future of the shipyards in Croatia, rule of law issues, and relations, of course, with neighboring Slovenia that for a long time blocked the process in the negotiation because of a border issue that was luckily solved in the end. And though negotiations with Zagreb started after the EU had verified that the country was a functioning democracy, improving the rule of law, and therefore I think also democratic character, remained a priority of the negotiations till the last moment, and in my view should continue to be monitored. And if I say that, I don't want to be the pedantic Dutch telling the Croats, you should do this or that. I just had a debate this morning with where our foreign minister was present, and it was about this rule of law mechanism. I'm very much in favor. If I criticize Croatia and I say something about the character or the state of your democracy, you should be able to do the same and criticize the Netherlands or France or Hungary or Italy. And that's why I'm very pleased that the Dutch government and some other governments have taken this initiative to demand of the European Commission to develop a kind of mechanism that will allow us, all of us, to be more critical of human rights situations, rule of law, minorities, and so on. So if I say something about Croatia and the new member states, be aware that I'm also very much in favor of you of new member states criticizing the older European member states. And if I look at the somewhat younger democracies, also in comparison to a country like the Netherlands, where we also have our problems, there are of course some differences that can be linked or related to the fact that the Dutch democracy has had 400 years to develop, and the Croatian one or the Polish one, or whatever, in only 5 years. So that where I think, so the democratic structures are there. It takes time to develop the democratic culture. I always said in debates with my friends in the past when I was rapporteur for the accession of Slovakia, it's easy to change the structure. It's easy to adapt to EU laws. It just let the parliament do some overtime and then adopt one law after another. Yeah, then you change the structure, but the culture and how to work in Europe and how to manage European rules, that takes time. And the same, in my view, takes a generation. To change the culture, it takes 5 minutes sometimes to change the structure. And the same is if you talk about democracy, the structures are there. Parliaments are suffering. There are elections, they are free and fair. Governments change, but still this informal element of democracy, which we find very important in the Netherlands, takes time to develop. And there are certain elements that are still problematic. I think what I know about countries like Romania or Bulgaria, it's still very top-down. Politicians don't relate actually to their voters. It's a top-down mentality, somewhat inherited from the communist period. That's one problem. There is an unclear idea of what is a conflict of interests. So there is a lot of linking between business and politics, which in Holland is totally unacceptable. So there's another area, I think, where there is still this element of corruption and crime and the fight against organized crime. There are some elements where I would say, look, these countries still have a lot of work to do, and let them concentrate on that before they waste time in the kind of debate that we sometimes have in the Netherlands. And let's work together also to further refine and strengthen democracy in the countries of Central and Eastern Europe and Southeast Europe. That would be my idea, the priority for these countries. Because if you want to play a role in the European debate, if you want to play a role in debate about what is the right balance between the national parliament and the European parliament, you can only do that if you have yourself a strong parliament that is well developed, that is critical, that is working in a way that makes it a real parliament. So I would really wish that countries like Croatia, but there are more, like I said, more new member states, also keep investing in improving this democratic culture, will help them to play an active role also in the European democracy debate. And finally, maybe I should not have finally, I think in the end, this is of course an important discussion, but finally, in my experience, I've been involved in a lot of European election campaigns. The main point is, of course, what we call output legitimacy. People in Holland will vote for the European Parliament or not, depending on whether they see that the EU is offering them something. And this is not, the democracy debate is about jobs and poverty and all the problems we have in all over Europe, especially after the banking crisis. That started in 2008, that started, of course, a series of huge economic problems. So the result, I think, is in the end fundamental in convincing people to support Europe. So that was it. Thank you very much, and I hope that you will contradict me and that then we have a real debate afterwards.
Thank you, Jan Marinus. If the European Union would go as fast as you speak, we would have the United States of Europe tomorrow, I think. I'm very happy to introduce to you Ms. Romana Vlahutin from Croatia. I'm improving the pronunciation. Thank you. She is nowadays the advisor of the President Josipovic of Croatia on foreign affairs, and she has an impressive track record on diplomacy, and she started her career, I'm happy to say, as a journalist. So this can lead to everything. I give the floor to you.
Skirts, but that's okay. Hello everybody, very happy to be here. Very happy to be back in Den Haag. I used to live in the city in the 90s. I worked for the ICTY. And I still remember, I lived in this neighborhood and I still remember all the streets. On the way to here, I lost page 1 of my rebuttal. So it will probably leave us a little bit more time for questions and answers. I come in front of you with 2 interesting deficiencies for the debate. One is that Croatia is truly, really a new member state, only 8 months, even less than that. So it doesn't give me a lot of material for a kind of discussion that I'm supposed to rebut. And second, I'm a foreign policy person. I have a foreign policy brain, so the way I look at Europe is infected by foreign policy issues as well. But this might give us a bit, let's say, maybe a bit broader perspective that can well together with what we already had. In our respective histories, I think both Netherlands and Croatia and all other countries in the EU joined, or you formed, and we joined the Union for one reason, and that's security. Stability and security. You forgot it, and you take it for granted. And I still call it peace. And it really shapes the way I see your debates. And all debates in Europe, and debate, or sometimes lack of debate in my country. The first rebuttal, the Croatian journey into EU started as an identity issue. We wanted to belong. We wanted to be regarded as Europeans, taken in the European family. It started as, I would say, even an emotional love quest, bring us back to the family. But very, very soon we hit the ground. And the ground was the weakness of the EU in a horrible crisis in former Yugoslavia, less than 2-hour flight from Amsterdam, where Europe really had no single voice, actually had very different voices that were fighting each other, to the detriment of the European people who lived in that region. And I think this makes this second enlargement that was basically started with Croatia and will, I hope, follow with other countries in the region, makes this second enlargement very different from the Big Bang. Our entire enlargement debate, if you wish, apart from these romantic beginnings, was extremely realistic. And I think very healthy. I think that made it very healthy. Absolutely nobody in Croatia ever thought that EU is a Disneyland that will solve all our issues. And although, I'm a diplomat, so my business is phrases. I hate phrases. And I have learned that you cannot explain realities to people with words that mean nothing or sound like communist language that we used to talk long before. So in Croatia, people understood Europe in this bigger sense of security provider or stability provider, and also as a framework which will give us chances that it's up to us to use. So Europe is not providing solutions. Solutions have to be provided by us. But it's giving us a chance, or chances, it's giving us a framework that makes it easier. And it gave us an extremely important and useful framework for change and for reform. In 25 years of its modern history, Croatia went through an incredible change. Literally. I think we did 5 parallel historical changes in 25 years, what some other countries take 100 years to do. To fight a war, to survive a war, to win a war, to create a state, to create democracy, to move to market economy, to go through all the European reforms that are needed to become a member. This put a huge demand on society. And it was very interesting. There was all the time a consensus of all elites in Croatia. We go to the EU regardless. There was no left and right, center, whatever difference. We want to be a part of the EU because this is where we belong. Public opinion was dwindling. At many, many times, it was less than 50%. It was not the usual 98% we want to join. It was, going up and down for a number of reasons. Negotiations were hard, were complicated, were demanding, asked for sacrifices that you described. They were really sometimes unfair, or we felt they were unfair, because they were moving targets. There was one thing that you had to reach, and then immediately there was another, and third, etc., especially when it comes to political demands that were put on us. But I think personally, as a citizen, it made us a better society, and it made us a far more functional state. And Croatia joined with a referendum that was 64%, I think, positive. In two sort of totally counterintuitive. It's not environments, and two totally counterintuitive issues. First, we fought for sovereignty just to give it up. It's very strange. And second, we joined really in the midst of crisis. Who normal would want to join a major crisis with Euro to disappear and all the doomsday scenarios that you could read in newspapers every day, as Europe is going to disappear tomorrow, etc. So those people who on many, many, many occasions were less than 50% in support of the EU when they came to the box, I think they made a common sense decision. And they voted yes. Existential, yes, common sense, literally. Why? When I try to describe it to my daughter, who is 10, I tell her, it's when you are living in a huge apartment house, and there are people who have wonderful places that are 300 square meters, some have 150 square meters, with terraces, etc. And you have a very small apartment, 1 bedroom, 50 square meters, and everyone is sharing the common sort of sewage and water and electricity. How can you not be part of the decision making in that house? Even if it's small, you still are in a much better position if you have a voice than if you don't, because you feel the consequences anyways. If the water is leaking, you can close the door, you can close the windows, but water doesn't leak through that way. I mean, there are other channels through which you will feel the pain. One more thing when I was thinking about the debate tomorrow, which I thought made us a little bit I would even say less afraid, or maybe more prepared for what's happening now, is that we know federation. We lived in federations. We learned how to give up, or how to negotiate, or how to get what we want, etc. It's not Yugoslavia was a specific, but it was a very it was an interesting, I think, political experience that we bring from that one, including white faith, which probably is the most important part of the experience. So it has been 8 months, and as a citizen of Croatia, I would say so far so good. And why? You used two interesting words, that the new member states are takers and not shapers. We certainly are not a shaper, and I mean, 4 million people country that is just 8 months into the union cannot be a shaper. But we are not passive takers either, or not passive on all issues. My experience is that, for example, and it's very important for the debate that will yet be opened in Croatia, there is still no debate, it's too early, I think, into the existence of Croatia as a member, is the EU Parliament. Our parliamentarians, few of them, were very vocal on some things that we care about, especially about certain issues in our immediate neighborhood, which is still a very volatile region, and you know what has been happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina recently, so things are far from point of no return when it comes to stability of that neighborhood. And I think also some debates that we could read about that were happening in the council, etc. I think that we are learning that it is possible to have a voice, even if it's small, even if you go against the other. Because, for example, in some decisions we went against majority of countries that voted, for example, for IPA funds on BH, etc. We didn't want them to be withdrawn. What is also interesting, European Union has already imposed some measures on Croatia, like excess budget deficit procedure. And in Croatia, it was not taken as something that Brussels is doing to us, no. It was taken as a very, I think, really a useful mechanism for us to go back in shape, or to help us to get back into shape. Because when you are a small country in transition, or a reforming country, you really don't have all the capacities, you don't have all the knowledge you need, and I think all those things do help. And this is something that is, for me, as someone who is in a way employed by the state, very interesting to watch how Croatian public is thinking about it. Also, what I personally find very important is that Croatia understands, and Croatian public understands, its obligations. First and foremost, its obligations towards its neighborhood. It's a very important part of the entire story of Croatia. I think we can give more than expected. And I think people in Croatia understand that this is also absolutely to our benefit. To something I call, in my speech writing to the president, I called it strategic generosity. When you are generous because sometime in the future you will reap the benefits of that generosity. This is what happened in Europe after Second World War in part, so I think it's a useful concept to remember. There is still no wide future of Europe debate. We're still really learning. It will come at our proportion in a way, but I think people are educated for that. One interesting thing, in 1993, Croatia was, deeply in war, and government already started giving scholarships for the EU studies to young people. And we have educated generations of mostly technocrats, or those who became an interest group, also in a way advocating EU. One obligation was to go back home and work for the administration for 5 years to pay off your scholarship. So there is understanding. It's not as sophisticated and widespread, etc., as I would wish, but I don't think it's in any country to be. I think it's not in any country to be honest to the point to which you would want it. I fully agree about the parliament thing, especially the strength of national parliament can reflect and help the feeling of ownership of democracy by the citizens. And now, as an analyst, I was thinking, what kind of issues, besides those that I don't really understand in detail, but understand in content, are to be discussed. As a citizen, I want to know, can people I choose properly represent my interests? And I still don't know. We will see when it comes to serious decisions that will reflect on our interests. It's too early to tell, and I really don't know. And I think it will take some serious experience in the EU life to be able to answer to that one. Second is a discussion of the future of EU and a possible scenario where EU will be a union of core and circles. Is this the way EU will develop? For example, we have very interesting conversations about it with our colleagues from Slovenia, because we are all countries on the rims or outskirts of Europe. And this is something that people back at that part of Europe are thinking about, because somehow we would be in the outskirts. Also, I lived in this city, and I still think there is an interesting mentality, cultural, and then translate political divide between North and South. And I still think there's a lot to learn about each other, because I think this lack of knowledge can create political issues that maybe normally would not be there if we understood that we might be even doing same things, but we call them different names. And finally, as a foreign policy person, for me, the most important question is, what do we want European Union to be? It started as a crisis management project, no doubt about it. It has a possibility to become a real world power. But to become a real world power, it needs far more capacities that come only when you have a very clear identity. And you get very clear identity only if you have very high level of unity. Is that possible? I don't know. I think it's a project we will see. Is EU going to remain a common market that has very sophisticated checks and balances, etc.? I'm not sure that's possible either. Some kind of growth will be needed, but I think we live in exciting times, and I'm looking forward to opening up this debate in Croatia. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Romana. Now we know what Croatia has to tell the Dutch people. So now we're curious what the Dutch people has to tell Croatia. So now I give the floor to the crowd, and I want to ask you to keep your microphone very tight to your mouth, because the whole meeting is recorded on video. So who wants the first question? Yes?
I can try to speak out loud. Or
No, I don't give the microphone away.
Okay. I have a question and a remark to our Romanian.
No.
Sorry. See,
It happens a lot.
I
Don't
did not do
worry.
it on purpose, but you see how it works. It doesn't work. Question is your flag already on the House of Europe? No problem. Yes, it is? Okay. Secondly, my remark. I'm glad that you mentioned again the prime motives for joining Europe: stability and peace. We have tended to forget this in Europe, and I think we could use a nice little fresh war among the old European countries to remind us of the reasons why we have Europe. Second is, you mentioned your strategic, to your Prime Minister, gratification. It's very old-fashioned. It's what the Romans said. I say it in Latin. Do ut des, I give, so you will give. I'm sure you will profit from EU. I also see the reasons why you need this framework to put order in your own country. But I wonder how long you will be happy, because the older members are not so happy anymore. And the first speaker mentioned this, and we have to learn how to be happy again.
Thank you.
Can I ask a counter question?
No.
No?
Yes.
I would take the microphone like this, because then you look at the people.
Yeah, it's easier. In order to answer that question, how long will we be happy? First of all, I wouldn't frame it as happy. I think we are okay. And why are you not happy? This is what, I would need to know what is bothering you to the point that all member states are unhappy, so that I can reflect on those sort of a measure of happiness.
If I may, because I don't agree with what you said about that we all member states need a war again to become happy about the EU. I think that we should learn to change the narrative, as they say. Look, people from my age and your age still think that this peace element is very important for EU and European cooperation. It is. It's still, and I hope it will remain. But there are other arguments like the economic motive or the argument of a community of shared values that are as important, and we should learn, I think, to work with different motives and different narratives if we talk about Europe and European cooperation. And we go now through a dip, so we are very unpopular, but if you look at, and I followed that a little bit, at opinion polls, the point is always that in general there is still support for European cooperation, also in the Netherlands. Nobody, I think a minority in Holland that would like to leave the European Union if we would have a referendum. The problem is that people are not happy with the results, and they don't understand actually how it works in Brussels. And I think that explains that many people are not happy, and there's something you can do about that. And I think that what the debate in your country and in other new member states is much more about the immediate consequences of having joined the European Union. We have been there since 56 or 57.
You want to react again?
Well, why don't I feel okay with the European Union at the moment?
Well, explain that, please. Then.
Yes. First of all, we have too many directives coming from Brussels to tell us to do things that we think we can do better on our own. Secondly, every country has a lot of unemployment. And of course, if you open the borders, people will come and take the jobs that maybe the Dutch don't want to do, but still they are taking jobs. So there are a number of reasons, I can mention a few more, but there are reasons why we are not happy, maybe okay, but not so happy at the moment, and I think it's largely due to the economic crisis.
I agree. I agree that the unhappiness is there, and it is, I think, basically explainable by the economic problems we are in. That many people blame the European Union for having caused this crisis and not having the answer, which may be completely fair, but this is the reality we're in. And once the EU starts bringing results again, and people have a more positive idea, then I think also the opinion polls will change. Because, like I said in my introduction, and also based on my long political experience, is the results. Whether it's national politics, local politics, or European politics, if people don't see results, they will either not show up for elections or have a negative attitude. And this is the same, I think, in Croatia or the Netherlands or in France or in Italy. But your criticisms are of course correct, and that this is a reason to be worried, and that we have to think about how we can change it. But I think the solution will not be to close the Dutch borders to Croats who want to work in the Netherlands. But that's maybe another type of discussion. Romana, you agree or?
I do agree, and I was thinking, for all the issues that you mentioned, decision making on different levels, let's say more local level, subsidiarity discussion, the question of employment, which is very interesting. You say people will come and take jobs that Dutch people don't want to take. We have something similar in Croatia. It's an interesting debate, but these are all, I would use the American word, doables. It's nothing that is saying that there is something fundamentally wrong with the idea of union as such. And I completely agree. I mean, it would be funny, childish to expect that all the time things can just grow. They come to a point, they go down, they go up, and they go down. And this is, I was astonished with, as I said, doomsday scenarios and articles in newspapers with euro, etc., as if only in our lifetime we didn't see ups and downs. Maybe it's also because of my life experience. I went through very many phases from we all basically lived an upper middle class life in former Yugoslavia to horrible war, and then you go up and down, and you get used to things that change. But it's up to us to change it. So I think it's really something that is doable, and that it's our obligation to deal with it. It's easy to blame it on, Brussels is the easiest scapegoat. But it's not decided in Brussels. It's decided somewhere else. So, ultimately it goes to Brussels. But I think it's also, I have to say, and then I'll stop. I'm now obsessed with this crisis in the neighborhood because it's really important to us. Yes. But I have because Brussels is also, it's a very complicated mechanism. It's a unique thing in the world. During the weekend, you had in Sarajevo Turkish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Russian Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, American Assistant Secretary of State. And only after all of that, you had an EU representative. Although it's a completely EU matter. Yeah.
They have to consult 20 capitals. I made a mistake. When I said something about labor migration, I meant the principle. But I said Croatians should be able to come here and work here if they do it in the proper way, like our Minister of Social Affairs wants. But Croatia has to wait 7 years, I think, 5 years, because there's a transitional arrangement. I also saw the Lithuanian ambassador smiling. So I support the principle, but I have to admit that in the case of Croatia, as it was the case of Romania and Bulgaria, there is a transitional period of 2 years.
But you can always come to our calls. That's okay.
Sorry.
Okay, we go to the next question.
Well, it
it's actually a little bit of an elaboration on the first part, because you said there is not a lot of results that you show, but I wonder if it's not that there are no results, or that we just don't see them, and then whose responsibility is it to show it inside of the member states? Because, for example, here, if you don't pay attention, you don't hear much about Europe. So then it's easy to have a negative impression about it, rather than being positive about the effects of it. And during the last lecture, there was also a note made that, well, you have this day about Europe where we are so proud of what we do in Europe, but if you have a day when there's, if we would have a day there's, everything is back to the old styles, without the benefits you have from the European Union, then what would it be like?
It was an idea of Beppe Severnini from Italy. He suggested a non-Europe day to withdraw everything what has reached so far. It's very interesting.
We once did a study in the European Parliament about the cost of non-alignment. Interesting. And it showed to be better than large, actually. If I may, then you, on the first question on results, you're absolutely right. That the part of the problems we have, that they were not caused by the European Union. They were caused by a banking crisis, and then a debt crisis, and then a euro crisis. And of course, what you could blame the EU for, that when we started the common currency and with the Treaty of Maastricht, we didn't think properly about some of the consequences if the economy would turn down, or if we would have a kind of crash like the banking crisis. So, in the end, and this is it's not a defense line, but you have to be aware that in the end, the European Union is built on sovereign decisions of 28 member states, not by the European Parliament, not by the European Commission. These are the councils of ministers that take the basic decisions and take basic responsibility for the direction of the European Union. And then to blame the EU for what is going wrong is somewhat tricky. But I've been in this business for a long time. I'm used to it that if I talk to colleagues from the national parliament here, it's always the good things come from The Hague and the bad things come from Brussels. And this alibi thing, I think, will never change. In the end, I always think what I said earlier. Basically, it's so logical what we are doing, whether it's for peace or for the economy or to defend our welfare model or our shared system of values. This is why we do it. And this is why I believe that the Wilders and the Roemers and the others of this world will not be able to destroy it, even though sometimes there is a doubt from many sides.
I totally agree, and I agree with you. When there is a good result, it's taken for granted. It's normal that it's good. When it's a little bit not good, then hell opens. And the problem is also with type of political and all other debates that you have in Europe when it comes to good results. It's a bit of a sophisticated, complicated discussion. Populist politics, it's 3 words, 2 words, 1 word. It's much easier to be a populist politician than to try to explain complicated concepts to people. How do you explain why enlarge to Macedonia, for example? Or how do you explain other things? So I think I fully agree with both of you on that one. And still, if you look around the world, this is still the best place to live when it comes to the security, social security and all kind of social nets that are still making life, I think, in Europe better than probably anywhere else for a common citizen.
To make a big run. You were first, I think.
Thank you. My name is Boris Farborough, Mr. Wiersma. I want to ask you, can you give me a definition of subsidiarity?
You were talking about
subsidiarity.
Yeah, well, look, it's somewhere in the treaty. There's even a protocol that allows the national parliaments to use this principle to block or slow down a European legislation. And when I mentioned this red card, there is a proposal. There's the idea also, I think, of our own foreign minister to introduce a red card so that national parliaments have a veto on European legislation. And then, of course, invoking this principle of subsidiarity, it basically says that what can be done locally should be done locally. What can be done nationally should be done nationally. And what you cannot do locally or nationally, you should do at the European level. And I think basically it's a Catholic principle once by a Pope who put it in one of his how do you call it? So this is where it comes from. And it's now actually, I'm not saying, it's used by some governments, including ours, to go into a competition with the European Parliament. Who's going to dictate after May the program of the European Commission? In that sense, it's interesting. But the national governments who want to have this battle, they have to use this principle because it's the only way into debate and the only way in which they can push the role of the national parliament, because it's already in the treaty. There's a special protocol about national parliaments being responsible for this subsidiarity thing.
Thank you very much.
It's okay?
Yeah.
I don't know which poll it was actually, but it was in the 50s.
A very good afternoon. My name is Khalid Choudhury from International Human Rights Commission, and also newly established the only women party of Netherlands, Vrouwenpartij, which is intending to contest elections in the European for the European Union. Actually, yeah, it's established and it's yeah. So. Actually, I wanted to put some questions in regard to human rights conditions in Croatia, but I'll go to the most critical situation, which is the rise of ultra-right in Europe. Mr. Wiersma, you are taking this slightly very easy, saying that there is a tiny majority in Netherlands and elsewhere, I mean, who will support these populist parties or other things. But what about the opinion polls which are saying that they are, at the moment, if elections are held, they are the largest party of Netherlands, and as well as Marine Le Pen and the others. So I have the question to both of you. Don't you think that the European Union or the European leadership has to throw away the ostrich policy, I mean, putting head in the sand, and to prepare, I mean, to stop them, I mean, getting into majority? Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I will answer to the next question.
Yeah. We spent the last 25 years on the values issue. And it was a huge training also in respect of human rights in the worst of circumstances. You know, war is not a great time to talk about that in a way that we all want. And I think we have learned an enormous amount about how majority has to protect minority, all kind of minorities, to have a situation where in the Croatian parliament, in the last session of the parliament, there was only one member of the so-called ultra-rights. Yeah. There are certain conservative movements, anti-gay marriage, there was a referendum. There are serious discussions within the society on some minority issues. Not anymore, I have to say, national minorities, although there is a problem with the Serbian national minority on the use of language in one particular town. But I think we, in a way, were also trained, even maybe more than some Western European countries in the past 2 or 3 decades on what does it mean to respect human rights. And what you talk about, outright fascist parties coming into the parliament. One conversation we had in Italy with the Prime Minister was, for me, an awakening signal, because I don't see it in my country in a way that they might have discussions in some other, let's say, older member states or some other states, I don't know. I understood that decision makers in Europe are scared, and that they see it coming, or it's in a certain amount, and they know that there is a possibility that is populist, or the worst of populist politics can take a bit more proportions than before.
Yeah, if I may, also you asked a question to me. Of course, it's very serious or not. It depends. We are living in a democracy here. That both on the right and the left populist parties are doing very well. And they are the biggest parties right now in the Netherlands in that sense. If this is related to Europe, I doubt it. Because what you see is a reflection of the unpopularity of the Dutch government right now. So the PVD is losing to the Socialist Party, and the VVD is losing to the Wilders Party, the PVV, in the opinion polls. The opinion polls are not elections. As we saw in 2012, the Labour Party went in 3 weeks from 16 seats to a final result of 38 seats. That's one point. Secondly, we also saw in 2012 that when people really started to think about Europe, and then the image of Mr. Roemer as Prime Minister having to go and represent the Netherlands in the European Council, his party dropped immediately 20%. Wilders, his campaign was totally anti-EU in 2012. He lost 10 seats. So I'm not sure whether this is the decisive factor, whether populists do well or do not well in elections. I think the European issue is important, but I think, as far as I know from my experience, it's a soft issue when it comes to elections, because on elections people vote for their wallet, for about health, housing, jobs, and what national parliaments and national governments are doing. But we have to take the signal very seriously that so many people are sceptical. They're not anti-European cooperation, they're not basically anti-EU, but they're very worried about how we do it. And this explains why they turn against EU and EU policy. So I think that we have to be able to create a kind of different Europe that is more convincing in the way it functions and the results it delivers. It will not be easy because we have to do this 2028. But I don't think you can, and this is not my last point, you can blame the rise of this Eurosceptic left-wing, right-wing populist parties to Europe. And anyhow, I think the Socialist Party will never propose to leave the European Union. They will be willing to compromise to get into government on the EU issue. The Wilders Party is different. That's true. But like I said, we'll have to wait and see. But we have to take. Let's see. We have to take at least seriously the concerns and the motives of those voters who now say will vote for the PVV or the Socialist Party, including the anti-Europe element that is there. And there I agree totally, and we, the more traditional parties, have to take that very serious. So it will be a battle. I see two big battles in the European elections. One is between the traditional party families, the Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, Liberals, Greens, and the other one is between the pro-Europeans and the anti-Europeans. And we will have in an extreme way compared to 2009, and we have to be prepared for that. And maybe we should have that debate because it's also in your country, my country, a fundamental one.
I saw one hand here. Oh yes.
Hello, my name is George Adronikidis. I'm Greek, and I want to welcome you to the European Union. Hopefully, the rest of the Balkans will follow soon. You said something about that your experience from Yugoslavia will be useful to the European Union, and I would like to ask you if you see similarities between the Serbian hegemony in the Yugoslavia. Yeah. I prefer UK English. Yeah. And between the Serbian hegemony in the Yugoslavia and the German hegemony in the European Union.
Oh no.
Very Greek question.
First, I didn't say it would be useful. I said this is an experience that we have. That when you sit around a table with more than yourself, you have to have a kind of discussion that will have to bring certain compromises from each side. It's completely not comparable. That was not a democratic state, and it's something completely different. But it's not that Croatia was a sovereign state forever and never had to share things with others. We had, and I think it's an interesting experience that can be, that is in us, in our political history in a way. Hegemony, I would not compare those two things at all. former Yugoslavia disappeared when Belgrade thought that it should basically be one country ruled by the people or the nation that was most populous in a way. So when it's left the notion of federation disappeared. And I think this is the best answer I can give you. I don't think that Germany is behaving that way at all.
I have not a fair question to put to someone from Croatia, but Germany helped Croatia a lot after the end of the military conflict. Croatia was the first to recognize Croatia. No, Germany was the first to recognize Croatia.
No, Iceland was first to recognize.
Yeah, but look, now that's why...
Germany was the strongest or the biggest.
Look, that's why I say not fair to ask from you, because you have been very much helped and supported by Germany, and you have a little problem with Germany, but it's going better in Greece now, so we should be somewhat optimistic.
Okay, yeah.
Well, first, I think it's going a lot better already if Greek is welcoming you to the EU. And I actually happen
They
to...
always did. There was this
I actually happened
thing that
to
made
run
them...
into a Greek restaurant in the city, and I saw Mr. Wilders eating there, so it's all going to be a lot better. As for now, thanks a lot for both of your speeches. I was going to have a question, in particular for you, Ms. Vlahutin. I read lately that actually conservatism is on the rise among Croatian youth, and I was wondering, well, first, if you actually see that happening too, and then what you think that will mean both for Croatia and the EU, and also, for example, for other states in the former Balkan or in the Balkan trying to accede into the European Union, or maybe I've just been reading the wrong newspapers. It's possible too, of course.
No, it's a very interesting question, and it's a question I always put when we have discussions about the future of relationship in the region. We don't know the kids that are coming. Who they are, in a sense that, you know, my life was, half of it I lived in under different circumstances, and I know a lot of things. People who are becoming mature now were brought up under horrible conditions. A lot of hatred, a lot of propaganda, etc. And I think that might be one explanation for, I think, a bit more conservative outlook of the youth. But what we were blessed with in Croatia, and it's not the situation with some other countries in the region, we never had visa regime. So we always were free to travel. And Croatia, by definition, is a border state. It's an open state because it has no other choice, being so thin and like croissant, you know, yeah. It's literally a big border, a big fat border. I sometimes joke. So it's something to look at. I wonder. I don't know yet.
Thank you.
Could I add a question about Croatia as a border state? It has not only borders with Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Montenegro, but it's also the outside border now of the European Union. So there maybe could be a risk that the other countries on the Balkan are isolated by Croatia and Slovenia. How do you look at that?
This is one thing, you probably don't know that, but when Croatia became a member, the first thing we asked from the fellow member states was totally unorthodox question. We asked them to allow our neighbors to enter only with their IDs, not with their passports. Because we thought it would be very little security risk and a major political and symbolic gesture to say we are not the border, we are just a bridge, or we are a ponton, or how you call it. It was impossible to get. Ministers of Internal Affairs of the European Union said no. And we lost that battle in phase 1. I think we will keep fighting it, because it's of major importance to have a sense of free movement. I think part of the quality of free societies come from the fact that they can move freely, and it was a huge benefit for the development of the Croatian society. we never felt trapped. And when you are trapped, I think your mind starts functioning like in a bunker, and you know what happens later. So this is, when you look at it as from a purely cost-benefit analysis, I think the benefits of visaless regimes for these countries is much better than the cost it can produce. But this is really our unique experience, and we had that privilege to be able to cross into our neighboring countries with our IDs.
You were very lucky.
We were very lucky, yeah.
Because they had a visa liberalization far ahead of Serbia.
We never had visas.
But if I may, because this is a fundamental issue, in a sense also the role of Croatia in the region. I think and I know the government of Croatia wants to engage, wants to help the countries also to the negotiations with the European Union, like Montenegro now and Serbia. But it's important that that line is kept by the country, and because we have some experience with Slovenia and Croatia, where one member state slowed down the negotiations with another member state. And this is the tricky. Once you're in, especially in NASM negotiations, every member state has a veto on every step in the negotiations. And the Netherlands used that several times in relation to Serbia, when it was about the cooperation with the tribunal here. So I know your government is not intending to, but there could also be a change in the relations between your country and Serbia, you never know, where then this risk is there, because Croatia can block all the other countries or helps all the other countries. And this is, I think, a fundamental point, apart from this visa liberalization, that these people can travel freely. Because it would have been stupid that Croatia would have joined the EU and the Serbs would then have to, or join Schengen, and the Serbs would have to ask for a visa to go to their neighboring country, or the Bosniaks. And the second point is maybe, but that's maybe not for this debate, is the whole issue of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's very vulnerable. Because there are a lot of Croats living there, also a lot of Serbs living in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The borders have never been settled completely. So I think also there we should work with you, especially in other countries in the region, to see whether we can solve this very dangerous situation. And you're absolutely right that the EU was again much too slow to react, even though the country as such is under a kind of tutelage of the EU. We can even send the Prime Minister home in Bosnia, and then if there's a conflict and real problems in the streets, we are now there.
And if I may just add, it's a key issue for the security of Southeast Europe, and Europe is such a key issue, not other smaller or bigger situations. I would not call them crisis situations, but this is a key issue.
So if it goes wrong in Bosnia and Herzegovina,
if it goes wrong, it really goes
you
wrong.
cannot ignore that. The Croatia cannot ignore that many Croats are living there. So you have to do something. The same goes
It's
for
not
Serbia.
only that, it's, I think, the first, or some say the second longest European border. It's 1,000 kilometers, and it's really, really complicated.
So do you think that the transformative power of the European Union is strong enough to cope with the national sentiments on the Balkan, of which we saw an outburst in the beginning of the 90s?
Absolutely. And I think, absolutely. And I think, why am I saying that? Because it's not that simple. So you have nationalism on one hand and European Union on the other, and then we move from one camp to another. There were structural problems that had to change. I always say when we talk about Bosnia and Herzegovina, we are always inventing another software to help, while there is no hardware to carry it. So there are certain issues that have to be discussed. It will take us another 5 hours to talk about it. But I read a phenomenal article about how much was spent on the international community involvement in Bosnia and Herzegovina, an enormous amount of money. Comparison is that US has spent $1,200 per capita, while they are spending $3 per capita in Africa. It's such a disproportion. At one point in Sarajevo, there were 15,000 international peace builders. So it's a huge industry on its own, but it's really for some other other discussion, which would really take us.
Yeah, but if I may, this is a basic point. I believe in this transformative power. It worked in Croatia, it works in Montenegro, it worked in Serbia, to my big surprise, because there is a really drastic change in Serbia over the last few years. And there's consensus. So there's consensus in Serbia now, there's consensus in Montenegro, there was consensus organized also between opposition and government in Europe. I was somewhat involved in the past with Mr. Racan. The same is in Macedonia. They have a joint committee for EU integration, chaired by one of the leaders of the opposition. So, but this is lacking. There's a look I think in Bosnia and Herzegovina there's consensus to be divided, and this is not so. There, a transformative power, even though we invested a lot of money, that is a huge problem, and I'm not so optimistic about whether we can solve this with this transformative soft power of the EU.
We can't. This is what I said. We can embed software, but first what we have to solve there is the core issue of the state. And then once that is solved, that's a hardware on which you can plug in. Yeah.
Okay.
I want to bring back the discussion a bit to what you were saying about intergovernmentalism and the community method and all those complicated things. By the way, I'm from Leiden University. My name is Elite Cortes. I'm doing a PhD there. Just last week, I visited Mil in the Brabant province. And Mil, it's a village in the Brabant province where I tried to communicate with people on the question of Europe, European Union, and the accession of new countries. And as it turns out, the people are not very aware of the question, and even they're quite indifferent, distant, and Europe is not really an issue there. It's not part of their reality. And I was just wondering, how would you explain those intergovernmentalism, community method to people there? Because they are part of the democracy that we were discussing here, but apparently they can't really share an opinion about all those processes just because they don't have the knowledge or the confidence that they have the knowledge to express one. And then, again, those would be the voters that now in May will decide who would be in the European Parliament. So I was wondering what's the connection between European institutions, their way of interaction and functioning, and then people on local level that are actually being affected at one point or another in their personal lives.
I think that I try to say that, in my view, it's important, not a basic issue. Don't go campaigning on institutional issues. People just don't understand it. It's too far away from them. Even in my own party or another party, or I talk to journalists or whatever, it's very far away. So stay away from the debate, but have it when necessary. And be aware, if you have the debate and you want to change, you need 27 others. It's very, very, very difficult. Now, my advice is always, it will be difficult to change and improve the situation. You can go step by step, do things like now, this new role of the European Parliament might help make it all somewhat more transparent, and there will maybe be somewhat more interest in what the EP is doing, because we have these common candidates of all this political families. But I think the only way to explain Europe is to link it to people's concerns about jobs, about the banking system. Can we change that? And for that you need Europe. And I think this is the way to do it, and not try to have. If I ring the door, you go canvassing, and what you did basically in Brabant, and I asked the people, what do you think about the balance between the intergovernmental and and then I asked them, I'm concerned about your job. Yeah. Should Europe do something about it? Yeah, of course. Then we have a discussion.
Yeah, well, actually, that was my approach, and it didn't work that way as well.
Sorry.
It didn't work that way as well, because I was actually trying to get their opinion about the effects of Europe on their own personal life, and I was trying to convince them that their opinion matters. Well, apparently they weren't really convinced, so nobody really showed up to our discussion on Europe in the village of Mil. And that was my direct experience on the ground with people on local level who are quite active otherwise politically and economically in their communities. And they're quite concerned about their lifestyle there, and yet they're quite distant from whatever happens out there. And I believe that many of them won't even recognize that Croatia is a new member state.
That's for sure. It's very interesting because when we tried to, when we campaigned for a yes vote on a referendum, I think a very wise decision was done to target almost exclusively the local level. to explain to people what does it mean. It means you can get your sewage done. It means you can grow so much olive trees and you get this subsidy for that, etc. So we tried to explain EU through the gains they have on the local level, because all politics are local, apart from us, you know, and the debate we have. But in real life, what I really care about is how I live every single day, not what is going to happen in 150 years with the EU. So,
but the most, I think the country where the EU is most popular is Poland. Why? Because the people see the export has gone up, average income has gone up. The subsidies have helped agriculture enormously. If you go also in the regions, you see they renovate the inner cities with EU funds. So the EU is, because there the EU has results, and people see the results, so they are positive about the European Union. Here is somewhat more difficult, especially now we're in a crisis, and people blame, partly right, the EU or the Eurozone for that.
Hello, my name is Jan Marinus Wiersma. I have a question for Ms. Vlahutin. What do you think that is the reason for the low percentage of voters in 2013 in Croatia for their members of European Parliament? Because it was only 20%.
It was only 20%, and they were the very first elections for only a year, because this was the term for our parliamentarians. And I think people really didn't have a clue. I think at the parliament, at the elections in May, there will be a bigger show. Oh, how do you call it? Yeah, turnout. Show up, turnout, because now they know what it means, how it looks, etc. At that very first round, it was only a discussion how much money they will get, what their salaries will be, what their privileges will be, etc. It was like a yellow press type of discussion. But I think at least some of our parliamentarians brought real issues into the public debate, and they were in our media, and I think this time people have a better understanding of what does it mean when you go and vote for the European Parliament, and what people you vote can do there, because they really didn't know. This is a complete novelty to voters.
Actually, the record is being kept by Slovakia, 19%.
Anybody else? Because yes, this is probably the last question, because even in Europe time is flying.
How would you see the relation between creating a culture while being in an economic crisis and results? How do you balance results in such moments and create a culture at the same time?
What kind of culture?
Create culture for European institutions. How do you want to manage that in this specific circumstances?
I think you are in a much better position.
Well, you can also, as I understand it, so if we have all these problems and we have high unemployment and we have cut the budget because of the Euro agreements, and also Croatia is under this European semester, so you are also in an excessive deficit procedure, like the Dutch are. We also don't underestimate that we are not the best kid on the block there. In this procedure, we are in the same situation as Croatia. The only countries that are not rising are Bulgaria, strangely enough, and Germany. There is a lot of problems that are linked to the European Union and to the Eurozone and being part of the Euro and all the measures taken to tackle the crisis. And these measures are also applicable to Croatia, even though you're not in the Eurozone, but you have to in the future. It's very, so to balance that with a positive attitude and a positive approach to the EU is not easy. But on the other hand, we also know that the problems that we had, and that started in 2008, could only be solved through the European Union, through the Eurozone, through working together. It was very painful, and not so much for the Dutch it was painful, but for the Greeks it was terrible. What your country had to go through, and still is going through, even though now maybe you see the light at the end of the tunnel. So sometimes in politics or in Europe, you just have to explain to the voters, sorry, we're in big trouble and we have to solve it, and we can only solve it if we do it together. And of course, many people are not convinced by that. But yeah, this is the way I try to defend it. If there would have been no Eurozone in 2008, after the banking crisis started, with the collapse of the Lehman Brothers Bank, I don't know what would have happened to the currencies of the EU countries if we would not have had this common currency. I think it protected us, basically. And still the euro is a strong currency. And what you strangely see now, that those countries that kept on throwing money to finance their imports and finance with cheap loans, they are now the countries in trouble. And it's not Croatia, it's not the Netherlands, it's not Turkey, it's Brazil, it's Argentina, it's Russia, maybe China. So what we did is at least create a strong basis and fundament under the economy and the monetary cooperation of the European Union. And even in this, when the strong winds are against us, I think a number of countries joined the Eurozone. Your country joined it, I think, or it's very close. Latvia.
We are joining next year.
Yeah, so Latvia is in Estonia is in, Latvia is in, Lithuania will be in next year, and they have, you had very difficult times also in the Baltic countries, and Slovakia.
We are now above the level of 2008.
Daarom, you cannot cross Latvia, but our island is more or less out of. But anyhow, it will take time to translate this into, you're right, into a more positive approach and culture and appreciation of the European Union by our citizens. But basically, I think the other way, so to say somewhat rashly, the Wilders way is not the way, I think, to solve the problems we have, or you have. So, anyhow, last word to you, Romana.
And this very discussion, I think, brought us back in a strange way to square one, which is why we all joined EU at one point, and its stability. And absolutely, there is no greater framework for stability than the EU is at the moment. I don't think anybody would doubt it.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your interesting reflections. I think maybe I'm not right, but I think that even the banking crisis and the debt crisis is deepening a kind of European consciousness in the way that we have to say something to each other, like the Dutch to the Greek and the Greek to the Dutch. So, like for the Persians. Thank you very, very much for your contributions, and hope to see you. Thank you very much, and hope to see you next time again. And remember Mill. So if you have one more moment, I have some presents for our distinguished guests. It's a small picture of the center of our political life. It's called the Binnenhof. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. This picture is familiar for you. But don't forget, it's your home country. So, one more announcement. There will be, thanks to the Croatian embassy, some bottles of Croatian wine in the lobby. So I'd like to introduce you to that. Thank you very much.